Hi all, a little later in this episode, we will be back with the next installment of our Pinot Noir education series with Erath Winery. And I wanted to remind you that you can taste along with us. Erath is offering a very super special The Four Top 6-pack of wines exclusive to you, our Four Top listeners, at a sensational discount. Go to erath.com/thefourtop to learn more and purchase those wines. Thank you so much, Erath, and I can't wait for our next educational installment.
I have a confession to make. We actually temporarily did run out of toilet paper for our nearby store where our family lives, and then one night I ended up having to use newspaper, and man, the times were rough.
Oh, Martin!
Hello and welcome to The Four Top. It's a roundtable discussion of today's hot button topics in the wine and food world. I'm your host, Catherine Cole, joined by co-host Martin Reyes, a master of wine, international wine consultant, winemaker, importer, and educator. Martine, I was talking to another master of wine the other day, and I was telling her she needs to call herself a master of disaster and surgeon of pain. But I don't remember where that reference comes from, because she was like, it's very embarrassing to introduce myself as a master of wine. But anyway, I digress. Martine, what are we going to talk about today?
Okay, that's the best intro, Catherine. I like that. Okay, listeners, we're going to be on the edge of your seats for this one. We're going to talk about, drumroll, the economics of the wine industry. Now, obviously, all jokes aside, this is an episode you definitely don't want to miss because we're joined by two finance rock stars and wine geeks who are a lot of fun to listen to. And I do feel like we're going to learn a lot today and enjoy every second of it.
Well, I can't wait. And with that, let's meet our panelists. We are delighted to be joined by Felix Salmon, the chief financial correspondent at Axios, co-host of the Slate Money podcast, and stealth wine expert.
Very stealthy.
In addition to all the other things he does, you can hear Felix hosting the Slate Wine Club podcast, and you can read his wine writing on VinePair, among other places. Hello, stealthy wine expert.
Hi, Catherine.
And Rob McMillan, executive vice president and founder of the wine division at Silicon Valley Bank, and author of an annual report I don't think I even need to introduce. If you are in the wine industry at all, you know about this thing. It's called The State of the Wine Industry. It is read by everyone in the business. We're so psyched to have you here. Welcome, Rob.
Everyone in the industry. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you, guys. It's nice to be here. And it's not often that I get to be the entertainment as an economist. So that's we'll see how this goes.
I think it'll be a lot of fun. But let's start off by getting our bearings. The economy has changed forever, and that has certainly been true for the wine industry, which looks a lot different financially than it did a few years ago. Rob, you have been publishing this aforementioned State of the Wine Industry report that Martine and I are very excited about for 20 years now. And I'm just curious if you could fill us in, the last couple years, what has really dramatically changed since, the beginning of 2020 for you?
Yeah, it couldn't have been any more of a herky-jerky change for that matter. We had acute oversupply going into the pandemic, and we had demand that was starting to trail off. We are actually, for still wine, into negative sales territory. And then we had this massive channel shift in purchasing with everybody going out. They were afraid to run out. And so it's one of those questions that you can ask at a party, what did toilet paper and wine have in common in 2020? And the answer, of course, is they were both hoarded. And, that just spiked everything at the grocery level. Of course, restaurants were closed. And also in most of the Western states and probably most of the country, starting in April of 2020, we had closing tasting rooms too. So to say, as an economist, being surprised is not really what you want to be, but I don't think I was alone in any case. And the interesting thing, I think, more than anything, is that we had two basic things happen really quick on supply. One, the very first thing was because grocery got totally cleaned out pretty much, the acute oversupply and the large producers that do have access to grocery, they got into balance really fast, and they started buying up the excess juice that was in the market to rebottle. And we went back to the old joke was, hey, do you bottle age your wine? Oh yeah, sure. When we put it on the truck, but and we really do have two markets. We have the big producers that are making millions of cases. And then we got small fine wine producers, and small fine wine producers weren't in such good shape. They're trying to figure out curbside pickup and how to deal with clubs, and we'll save some of those for a little bit later in the show. But it was quite difficult, and if that was bad enough, we end up with something that's none of us have ever seen, which was fires and smoke in the entirety of the West Coast. The only spot that lucked out from that was probably Santa Barbara, which had actually turned out a pretty good year, and really good wine quality. But the rest of the western states had to cope with smoke. We've never seen that before.
Crazy year.
It's crazy. And then, but the thing that happened is that acute oversupply got eaten up in a very different way. It got eaten up because of smoke taint, and we had to destroy a fair amount of wine, and then just not pick a fairly large number of grapes. We ended up with the lowest in California. Was the lowest grape harvest we've seen. I'm going to say in 8-9 years or something like that. So that puts us back into balance.
That doesn't sound that very long.
No, it doesn't.
8-9 years feels like relatively recent history. It wasn't like a massive, unprecedentedly small harvest.
Yeah. Well, we went from, if I'm getting it right, I'm trying to remember, I think it was 3.35 million tons in California, and typically we're looking at 4 million tons. But when you're dealing with effectively a zero growth rate, any change in supply or demand get felt pretty quick on the other, and so that pretty much cleared up our supply issues, at least for now. At the business level, anyway.
What a strange story. So, Felix, you cover the economy. Is wine alone? Is it just a total outlier, or were there other industries that looked like this over the last couple of years?
There's definitely any number of industries where supply disappeared. Like the entire service industry, basically. All of the hotels shut down, restaurants shut down. Airlines, there were barely any flights. So that kind of thing where supply and demand dynamics of the industry got completely shaken up and moved into completely unprecedented territory, that we saw in a bunch of different parts of the economy. What I'm struggling to think of is an area where you would see a massive spike in demand like this. I live in New York State, and I know a bunch of wine retailers. When I say no, I mean I go shopping, and all of them, without exception, have just been talking about how their year has been off the charts and amazing, and people have been buying more wine than ever and drinking better wine. I think one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that people kind of had this sort of intimation of mortality and felt to themselves, why am I sitting on these amazing bottles of wine? I should be drinking these amazing bottles of wine. And then realized that they actually quite liked drinking the bottles rather than sitting on the bottles. And so they kept on buying more good bottles and drinking those as well. So I have this question for Rob, really, which is like, it sounded, sort of reading between the lines of what you were just saying there, that what I might think of as supermarket wine did really well, but if you're a smaller fine wine producer, maybe you didn't do so well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. If you look at all of the data, grocery store, those wines actually increased price, and if you look at the wines, let's just call it $20-$25 and above. Those wines, especially beginning of the year prior to the fires, they were discounting and doing things that you normally wouldn't do. For instance, free shipping, which creates all sorts of long-term, expectations from buyers. Wine's heavy; it's made out of water.
And is that mainly just because they relied so heavily on restaurants?
Yeah, it's a combination of fear. Right, because nobody had ever seen the restaurants close and the tasting rooms closed. Those two things combined for an average winery represented about 40% of annual sales, and we start off with acute oversupply. So it's pretty common that it's almost binary when somebody thinks that there's too much wine, discount, which is not really what you want to do from a branding standpoint for a luxury good. You don't want to get into that game. You want to manage your supply better is what you want to do. But nevertheless, with however many wineries you want to see in the United States, the numbers in theory 11,000. There's no coordinated effort on pricing, and there's the information out there is not good, and especially the information wasn't good last year. So everybody's winging it, and they're just trying to figure out how to get money to keep the lights on. It was very difficult, especially early on.
From an anecdotal perspective, on premise, or for the listeners, that's usually refers to restaurants or hospitality. I make two more expensive wines in a winery that I manage, and both of those before the pandemic were, for the most part, allocated. The term for reserved and so forth for specific restaurants. And towards the right around that turn, I lost the placements, and I was stuck with several dozens of cases of expensive wine that I needed to find a different home for. Didn't see that coming. And that was, that obviously has a cascading effect around everything else that you focus on as a manager or owner or vintner of a small winery. It was there were tectonic shifts that happened that I still feel like we're feeling the effects of now, and that we will continue to feel the effects for many years to come.
And so, Martin, is what Rob was talking about? Is that what happened to you? Did you find yourself with all of this wine which you needed to move, and decide that the way to do it was to discount it, basically, to sell it to some?
Don't ask a brand owner if he's going to discount his wine.
I'm naive here. I don't know what not to ask.
Tell everybody that the wines are very expensive and worthwhile, and it's in allocation. You can't find it.
we fortunately did have a strong following with our club, and some retailers that we had a good relationship with that picked up the wines that they hadn't had access to before. And so we did okay. But that isn't to say that there weren't challenges. Absolutely, there were challenges. And I think collectively speaking, if no matter what winery you're at, if you have a plan and that plan is messed with, right, for 1 month, then 2 months, then 3, then 6, then a year, you're asking yourself questions as a business that you didn't think you were going to be asking yourself. We certainly asked those questions. I think, the listeners and businesses, right? If you're a small business, you were asking yourself questions that you didn't expect to, no matter what industry you were in. I think that is the general answer I can give you, Felix.
But I hate to come in and be like that guy, but isn't this a business where shit happens on a kind of annual basis? We saw this in France, right? With the frost, there was like an entire vintage more or less wiped out in large chunks of France. Like, you have to expect, if you're in the grape growing business, that in some years are going to be like really bad years.
We certainly depend on nature. We depend on farming, right? And some of us are farmers, and some of us depend on buy from farmers. So yeah, I had some of my Pinot Noir wiped out entirely due to smoke taint. I didn't produce 2 wines of 2020, but yes. So there is sort of, it tests your resilience, and there are ups and downs. The general point, though, is that you have general relationships with the channels, and they tend to stay open. This is the first time a channel just clamped down as far as restaurants went. That never happened before.
Right.
So that was outside the bounds of the curve.
And then the other thing that was going on at the same time, and I really wanted to ask Rob about this, is that we had unprecedentedly large tariffs on European wine.
Mm-hmm.
Did that help the American winemakers?
I don't really think so. As a matter of fact, most people in the U.S. wine industry were in favor of removing them.
Yes.
Prior to those tariffs taking effect, the tariffs that are over in the EU are actually higher on American exports or imports for the EU than the opposite. And we were asking for things to be right-sized, normalized, and but I don't think it really made that much of a difference. Remembering that there was hoarding going on, so that when you have hoarding, which was what happened in March of 2020 and into April, that removes rational economic thought from the equation. It's just, I don't want to run out of toilet paper. That's what it really gets down to. So
I don't want to run out of toilet paper or white Bordeaux,
Or
and
wine.
sometimes I go back and forth on which one is more important.
So, Rob, I want to get in here and ask you a question totally out of left field that kind of doesn't totally relate, but I've just been curious. With Biden's administration kind of clamping down on taxes, do you think moving forward, people are going to be using wineries as like tax shelters? Because, they say the best way to, what is it, Martin?
Become a millionaire?
To make $1 million.
Become a millionaire is to start with 10 million and sink it into a...
Yeah.
That actually has been going along. I would say it probably started with the Reagan tax changes and accelerated depreciation, which I'm sure all your listeners would love me to talk about that. But in the Reagan years, effectively what they would do is they would say, if you make an investment in anything, you can write it off against current income, which is always, you want to try to push your current income down and increase your capital gains, which are always taxed at a lower rate. So that's the way a lot of the wineries in the 70s and 80s were started, because of those tax advantages. And then through time, it's still worked out the same way. It takes a long time to start a winery. It takes a tremendous amount of cash. And as long as you can offset that against another business that you have, then, it's okay. Truthfully, at least in my view, it was the Trump era taxes that were probably more painful for both right and left coast. I don't know of any wealthy person that I've talked to in my portfolio that paid less in taxes after the Trump tax plans.
That said, you do know a lot of very wealthy Californians. I mean, California has a much healthier budget than anticipated because Silicon Valley is booming and people are going public and making gazillions of dollars.
Yeah, it's about 2/3 of California's budget is based on changes in the stock market or IPOs. So that's a big part of California's budget for sure.
So is that showing up in people buying wineries?
Yeah, so now we're getting into a little bit more ethereal things. So it's the policies of the Fed that are driving interest rates down to zero effectively, and actually negative on a real basis when you take out the impact of inflation. And it's more than an interesting time, because it's created so much cash that's just floating out there that's driven stock prices higher. And we had what we called SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies, that started to form at record levels, which are it's kind of like going public before you actually have any product.
Have there been any wine SPACs? Has anyone tried to take wineries public via SPAC?
Yeah, there has been one.
Wow.
Oh, what's that?
Yeah, just one. Vintage Wine Estates, which is a roll-up company, which when I say roll-up for the listeners, that means it's a company that goes in this case, they look for undervalued, distressed wineries to bring in, and then they try to put all the marketing in one spot, put all the sales in one spot, and find efficiencies. It's not been a very good business model historically, but it's working out in this case. Another one, Duckhorn, that just went public here recently. Duckhorn has been one that was purchased by private equity.
And then they listed it on the stock market. And so now if I can open up my Robinhood account and buy shares in Duckhorn.
And it's the stock ticker is NAPA.
Which is my question for Martine. Like, given the choice between, $20 of stock in Duckhorn or $20 of Duckhorn wine, which would you choose?
That's a good question, but no, I love the people at Duckhorn, but at the same time, yes, I certainly see I'm not a financial advisor. I'm in the wrong space. I drink too much. So that's my problem. So I probably would choose the Duckhorn itself. So, going back, I think of something here, Catherine, you and I both wear a few different hats in this crazy wine industry. And one of yours just to shift a little bit the topic here, one of yours is working directly with small wineries who want to become competitive in the digital space. So from your perspective, what has changed since 2020?
I loved that Rob pointed this out in his report, and of course we will we'll post links to his report on our social media feed. The advent of online wine sales for small wineries, yes, as Rob pointed out in his report, yes, the advent, like small wineries that didn't even have websites or didn't even have e-commerce suddenly jumped into it. And that part of my work, I was completely overwhelmed. Everyone needed a new website. Everyone needed new e-commerce. It was just really interesting to see that these wineries that thought all these years that they had to rely on distribution didn't. And they thought they had to rely on tasting room visits, didn't. You can create a tasting room experience digitally online with beautiful design. You can welcome people into your world. You can tell your story. You can create a whole narrative. And you can sell wine directly to consumers and make, can I say a shit ton more money because you're not going through the distribution chain. And I'm sure Rob can explain that better than I can. But
I mean, there's just fewer middlemen. That makes sense. But like Catherine, I have so many questions for you on this one. I mean, there is a pretty obvious difference between the real world tasting room experience and the website. And I don't need to spell it out. How on earth can you recreate a real world tasting room experience if people, aren't actually tasting?
The thing that's also surprised me, and I have sort of led quite a few tasting seminars and that kind of thing, as have you, Martine, I was really surprised at how well Zoom fared to the point where we don't need it anymore, but people still want to do Zoom tastings.
Zoom tastings are awesome. I'm a massive fan of Zoom tastings.
I can't tell if you're being serious or not.
No, I am actually being serious. So I think Zoom tastings was one of those things which was a lot of fun. We were all stuck in our bubbles and weren't allowed to see anyone. And Zoom was awesome for that. I know a bunch of people who genuinely learned a lot about wine through Zoom during the pandemic and, will have thereby become much more sophisticated wine consumers. It was definitely a thing.
I must admit, I think my first Zoom tasting post-pandemic, once the pandemic started, was the John Bon Jovi rosé tasting.
Dive into water.
It was.
What was it called?
I think it's Hampton's water. I'm not sure.
Hampton water. There you go. Yeah. So Catherine, I love this because wine is all about stories, and I'm convinced about this.
Yeah, I think that the digital space, creating these beautiful stories with imagery is so important now. I think we all kind of wondered, what's the point of online retail? And now we get it. You can create a whole world online, and then the buyer joins your club or joins your mailing list, clicks buy, and guess what? You're sending them the wine directly, and you can include another story in the box. You can keep sending them MailChimp. Would MailChimp like to sponsor us? Because I'm going to call them out right now. You can send them those MailChimp newsletters. I work with some wineries. They do their personal recipes and they do their stories about the animals on the farm, and people just love that. They feel like they're friends with the winemaker. And I think that's what works about those Zoom tastings too, is some of these winemakers are total rock stars, and you can engage directly with them and ask them a question, and they're right there in your living room.
On the Zoom tastings, as we start to think about, what still actually works, there's a disagreement. Some will say, "Oh no, that was something only for the pandemic," and I've been saying actually for a long time, very long time, that since it was Skype tastings, that was an idea that I had way back before Skype was bought by Microsoft. Microsoft ruined it. But now, when you think about the changes in the consumer, one of the things that's happening is we're going to still end up with Zoom tastings. For instance, if you're expecting everybody in Ohio to come to your Napa Valley winery, and that's how you're going to sell wine, that's dumb. Because that's like asking, as an example I use all the time, it's like asking somebody to go to Detroit to buy your car. It just doesn't make any sense. But as we move forward, there's a couple of other things that are happening. One, it is an opportunity to talk to somebody in Ohio or wherever else. And then one of the big things that wineries are discovering is that this work at home thing, with people now at home, now you're having corporations that are having a hard time defining their own cultures. And, how do we have fun together digitally? And, so can we have more digital concerts? And, you know what? Zoom tastings actually work for corporates.
I'm gonna take the under on that one, Rob.
Right.
Like the prospect of like an enforced fun corporate Zoom tasting where I'm like drinking wine with my colleagues, with whom I already have excess Zoom fatigue, is I don't know. I wouldn't jump at that opportunity.
A corporate happy hour with 500 people on your screen is clearly not an appealing aspect for some companies in some situations, but it's not whether that works versus not, all or nothing. There's going to be a shape, right, in which people who say in Ohio, whether it's an alumni event for a winery who went to that university, right, to ship boxes in a more convenient method, and then have everyone taste at in the comfort of their home from picking something up. Our comfort zone is expanded. Right, we know that our comfort zone is expanded. What shape is it going to take in the future? Whether it's through new technology like AR, augmented reality, or VR, if the price comes down. These are all some of the fascinating questions. But from the looks of the report that Rob put together, this channel is taking root somehow.
It's omni-channel. That's where we have to be. We have to get to the point where we actually know the consumer, and that consumer can check in with your club.
Right.
They can buy at the tasting room, and your systems are good enough that you actually know who that person is, and give them that seamless experience between your channels. And that's where we have to go. And in some cases, we're starting to go there because platforms are being built that allow it.
I was interested in it, like, as DTC grows, just as an environmentalist and someone who cares about these things, like, are you moving to lighter bottles? Is that a thing?
Yes, there's a lot that one can do, glass and a bunch of other materials, whether it's recycled, reuse, or looking at alternative packaging, which I'm starting to look into. But that is the short answer is yes. And
I promised Catherine that at some point in this episode I would mention the economics of box wine.
The B word.
Oh, boxes, yes.
Boxes are amazing, and I'm a massive fan of boxes, and I can tell you that pretty much my biggest frustration as a wine consumer in what is one of the top 2 places in the world to be a wine consumer. Like, I think London and New York are really like as good as it gets in terms of just the range of wines you have easy access to. But my biggest frustration is a severe lack of high quality box wine. If there was more of it, I would buy so much more of it.
Oh, this could go into such geeky territory. I mean, I want to drop the word reductive, and then I want to drop the word oxidative, but then I'm afraid we will lose all of our listeners.
I have a solution for you, though, Catherine. For your oxidative wines, you don't ship them in boxes; you ship them in little mini barrels.
Right.
we call them kegs here.
Kegs, baby kegs. There's nothing I love more than walking into a bar in Madrid and asking for a Fino, and they just like pour it out of the barrel.
Shipping from California to New York in a barrel. I don't know if that will make it into that might barely make it in one piece.
Martin,
Ooh.
Sorry,
yellow card.
See,
out.
I always laugh. Well, hey, first of all, I think we need to take a quick sponsor break. So we will be right back. Folks, it's the moment you've been waiting for. This is our 3rd installment in ERAS's Pinot Noir Education Series. We've got 6 sip-sized Oregon Pinot Noir history lessons for you to enjoy while we all taste wines from the 4Top 6-pack. That's 6 bottles selected by ERAS just for us. If you haven't already purchased your wines, get in there and get that discount at erath.com/the4top. Now, we are tasting a fancy older vintage today. This is the 2015 La Nuit Magique Pinot Noir. I'm really curious to taste this since 2015 was actually an uncharacteristically hot growing season here, and harvest happened early. Clearly, being in this for more than 50 years, this winery knew what to do with this harvest. This is a delicious wine. But I'm going to hand my mic over. Rachel, what do you think?
I love this wine. It has a little bit of that savory stuff, so it has like cedar on the nose, a little bit of like Oregon fir, so all those Oregon forests that we love, but then also like the ripe plum and like a little bit of berry. This is just delicious.
What do you think, Izzy?
Yeah, I could smell this wine all day. Absolutely wonderful, and the taste is even better.
As you can tell, we're having a lot of fun recording these little Oregon wine history lessons, thanks to Erath. We left off in the last one in 1969 when Dick Erath planted his first vines. Now, it takes about 3 years for grapevines to mature enough to bear fruit that will make fine wines. So let's move forward to 1972 and Erath's first commercial vintage. The production of 216 cases was the first in the Dundee Hills. It's tough for us now to imagine how much work it took to make these wines back then with pretty primitive equipment and no real winemaking resources in the Willamette Valley. And what's amazing is how good these wines were and still are. And in fact, I've actually seen a bottle of Erath from that first vintage, and I have to say, the label is beautiful. I mean, so much thought was put into this winery from the very beginning. And that's it for today's history lesson. I hope you'll join us next time, listeners, but before you do, make sure you've got your Four Top six-pack so that you can taste along with us. Go to erath.com/the4top for that special discount of about $40 off retail, and remember, you can save an additional 10% if you join the Erath mailing list before you shop. All right, back to the episode. Everyone, a word that's come up repeatedly during this episode is the word club. And we're not talking about something that you beat someone over the head with. We're talking about a wine club.
Come on, Martin. I know you want to get the baby seals in here somehow.
Well, seal my doom if I do that.
I'm just going to lay the groundwork and say there are basically two kinds of wine clubs. One, you join because you want to support a specific winery, and the winery just sends out their own wine maybe once every quarter. And the other is more of, it could be run by a retailer, some sort of curator, maybe a sommelier, who gathers up all these interesting wines and then sends them out every quarter or twice a year or whatever the timing is. And Felix, you have a podcast, which is called the Slate Wine Club. And it's kind of unusual because I don't know of another wine club that comes with an audio element. So I'm very intrigued being an audiophile. So tell us a little bit about the Slate Wine Club.
So the Slate Wine Club is, I'm preface this, and I'm very open about this, that I am not a businessman. I have no interest in that business. Like financially, I'm like the voice of it. They needed someone who had a vague idea of what the difference was between a red wine and a white wine to interview the winemakers.
And a fabulous British accent.
And the fabulous British accent, and they send me some wine to taste, and it's all fun. I'm very happy to do it. But for me, it's a very natural thing for publications, right? So we've had like the Wall Street Journal Wine Club has been around for ages. I think, a lot of other newspapers, certainly in the UK where I'm from, this idea has been around for a long time. And if you trust the publication and you want to support the publication in some way other than buying like a subscription to the publication, and you like wine and you trust the people like me or the wine writers at the Journal, whoever it might be, to pick good wines, it makes it easy and you can feel a little bit virtuous just signing up for this club. And especially for the Slate Wine Club, you get to sort of pick, you can listen to my interviews with the winemakers and you can say, I like that guy, I want to try his wine, and you can order his wine. In that way, I would say the wine club acts a little bit like any other direct marketing channel. It's just a way to reach consumers. And it seems to, there isn't a huge amount of overhead involved, and you pick the wines and you send them out. It's too early to tell, to be honest, like how successful it is, but it's a low risk operation. But it also has the opportunity to be incredibly successful. So it's a good sort of risk profile there. Like it can be very successful, but it can't be very unsuccessful.
One of the main revenue generators for most small wineries that make premium wine is the club. And oftentimes it's 20 to 30% of total sales. So it's a big deal. And it is actually a lot of work because, you've got to think about this consumer, where they live. And if you're going to do it right, you got to think about what they buy. You got to think how they buy it, how often they buy it, how often do they want to buy it. And ideally, what you're trying to do is actually get to the point where you could have forecast level metrics, so that there is some prescriptive action that you take when you get to, let's say, month 24. A typical wine club member will last for about 30 months right now. Ideally, you'd love to push that out further. And if you say, okay, well, there's a big drop off in this age group when they hit 24 months, then here's a prescriptive, we want to change this offer up, because people just get bored.
It really helps to have a range of bottles. Like if you're something like the Slate Wine Club, like you're not connected to a particular winery, you don't have that problem. You don't have the problem that people just get bored of receiving the same wine over and over. You actually have a different problem, which is that if people really love the wine they got, they can't actually get more of it through the club, or it can become hard for them to just keep on going back and saying, like, hey, I really like that wine that I got from you a year ago. Do you have any more of it? And you're like, no, we've moved on from then.
There are probably a couple of subsets of the curated wine club. And I'm speaking from the perspective, I was in the retail shop where we would curate our selection for people that signed up for us. I did manage in the early 2010s, the New York Times Wine Club and the Food and Wine Magazine Wine Club and Michael Mina and a few others. And the economics were fascinating because we were competing with other larger clubs that had different economics within their system. And towards the end, frankly, we ended up not having enough marketing dollars to be able to compete and announce our club, because, as Rob said, there is an attrition point, right, where between 2 and 3 years, people give up, they move on, they lose job, they move or whatever, or they go to a winery and they say, oh, I've got too much wine now, I'm going to cancel one of my clubs. One of the keys to know for the consumers who are listening, for the listeners here, is, well, how do I know if what I'm buying is priced fairly, if it isn't just a sort of smoke and mirrors packaging that a marketing graphic designer slapped on a nice kind of glossy or semi-glossy label and then called it something, where in fact they were buying, a lower quality bulk as opposed to higher quality, and then leveraging that gap, that mystery of what its retail price is. This is what's fascinating now, and I wish that I was buying wine clubs now, because of everything we mentioned. The virtual space has matured, right? The technology, the ability for a grandma and 6-year-old to get on Zoom calls right now is light years away of where it was 2 years ago. So there's an expectancy that if you're doing a club, you have that communication, that your availability, and if Felix is available to interview the specific owners or the winemakers of Mastro Berardino, right, making a Taurasi wine, that's a legitimate place you can actually go visit. You can walk the vineyards, you can talk to the winemaker, you can know what that wine price is in other areas. What Felix and Slate Club is doing is curating existing noble producers. I call them noble, as like, they exist, they're legitimate.
Or in Mastro Bernardino's case, like literally like 12th generation.
Right. And so you dig in a little deeper, and with technology and with ease of fluency around the space that consumers didn't really have before. People weren't on Zoom, they weren't on Skype, not even then. They weren't on all of these elements that they're expecting now. And so we were equated, Terra Stregata Falangina was equated with, gee, I wonder if this is any good, because I never heard of it before. Well, you haven't heard of it because it's a legitimate winery in Italy that was only imported by us. But in this case, you don't know the difference back then, you didn't know the difference between the two styles of club purchasing.
So Martin, like, let's be clear for the listeners here. What is the trick How can you tell the difference between the two? What is the easy way of telling whether these are legitimate winemakers or whether it's just a rebranded bulk wine?
Well, goodness gracious, I think there's never been a stronger endorsement for wineries to develop their virtual space, their digital space. If you look for it and it doesn't have it, it doesn't mean it isn't a legitimate winery. It means it might not be, right?
But obviously, if I'm rebranding a bulk wine, the first thing I'm going to do is spin up some stupid website to make it look fantastic.
Yeah.
Looking like Googling it is not going to help me.
I'm not saying make it look nice. I'm saying what's the story and find out who's the winemaker, what's the terroir, who's producing, and is this something you can find potentially on the winery's website itself, on its own site.
Now we're back to this eternal issue with wine, which is in order to appreciate it, you have to go educate yourself, which I know is an issue with finance as well. And this is something we struggle with as an industry. In order to enjoy us, you need to do some reading and some research, and you need to dig.
Or alternatively, you can just lie by the pool and drink Hampton water, and you can enjoy that too.
That's true.
But Felix, how would you? So, if somebody were to ask you, how do I know if I'm getting a good deal with you? Because you're doing a good job, so I want to know what your answer is. Actually,
I mean, my answer is you have to trust Slate. Right. I mean, I feel like no, and I'm quite serious. Like this is part of the value proposition is that Slate is not going to do what you're talking about in terms of rebranding bulk wine, not least because that's just like not the business we're in. We don't have the resources to do that, even if we wanted to. But it's the affinity thing, right? I don't think we're going to be reaching a bunch of people who don't listen to Slate podcasts and don't read slate.com, right? We already have that relationship of trust there, so people can trust us. And if they don't trust us, they're not going to become members of the club, and that's just a fact of life. What we don't have, I think one of the things that's really happening right now as we get further into 2021 is the people bought a lot of utter crap on Instagram over the pandemic. And it was clothes, it was masks, it was air fresheners, it was rust. I mean, whoever, it was.
Why are you looking at me right now?
a bunch of random shit. Cookware. Oh my God, the cookware that got sold on Instagram over the pandemic, right? And people rapidly realized that, a glossy ad on Instagram and a fabulous website and a seamless customer checkout service does not mean a good product. And I think we are right now in 2021, beginning to experience that backlash, right? Of like, wait, hang on a sec. I can't trust things which look good online anymore. And I don't know how that's going to affect the DTC wine business, but I think on some level, I mean, I might be, tooting my own horn a little bit here, but I think on some level, the way you get around that problem is to have an already existing trust relationship, and you have that at Food and Wine, you have that in the New York Times, you have that, if Astor Wines here in New York City has a monthly wine case, I know the people there, and I know they're not going to be trying to rip me off, and so I feel like that kind of relationship of trust is more and more important in a world of drop shipping websites where I wind up getting something from Shanghai which bears only the vaguest resemblance to the thing that I ordered off of Instagram.
And I might have a couple of curling irons that I maybe, and possibly some facial things that I might have bought off Instagram. And it's possible that I don't understand how to use them and have never used them. But please go on.
At the end of the day, you still have to find out if they have an interview with the producer like Felix does, and is that real or is that fake?
No one is going to fake that.
That's my point.
Seriously,
that's my point.
That's not going to be fake.
My point is that you are doing something that can't be faked, right? So then so there's not just marketing, but also something real and tangible. And at the same time, when you hear, there's always that fear, like, gosh, am I being hoodwinked? because ultimately there's 10,000 wineries a year registered or more, I think, in the US in terms of labels. And so there's always that daunting aspect. So you bring up a good point, Felix, whether it is a brand that you can get behind, whether it's a Slate or Astra, as you mentioned, or K&L, or.
But it's also like, I mean, it's an interesting conversation I actually had with the guys running the wine club, like before we started. The idea was that I was going to be interviewing the winemakers, and obviously, if I'm interviewing the person who made the wine, especially if it's someone who's been in the business for 12 generations, then you kind of like, it's legit. But not everyone makes wine that way. There are very interesting, totally genuine, very high quality winemakers who don't grow their own grapes. Who,
That's me.
That's you. And so at that point, then it starts becoming, it becomes a slightly more interesting interview. Let's just say that, because I need to start talking to you about, like, so how do you find these things? Well, tell me, like, that process of, like, I grew the grapes and I made the wine becomes slightly more complicated and more intermediated.
Yeah, but I would be up to the challenge. Not that that's the point of this. But
Yeah.
Rob, do you have any thoughts on the matter here?
Well, yeah. I mean, if I look at it from the consumer standpoint, and when it's not just about the trust that you put in somebody that's curating, it's what your friends say. Because in the end, what you're looking for is something not just from a trusted advisor, but a friend. You want somebody that you innately trust. And when you're building clubs, what you really want is your best friend to be in that club. You might even find him in that club. And the reality is it gets very difficult then to leave a club when your best friend is there. Right? It's just sticky. You're there. And so figuring out as a business how to encourage that lateral communication ends up being one of the keys to success. It's not top-down communication. It's lateral communication that matters. It's not the winemaker telling you what is good. It's not the owner telling you what the good. It's not the New York Times telling you what it's good. It's your friends telling you what's good. And so what you have
Oh my God, I want your friends, Rob. My friends have.
So what you have to do is you end up having to put in place, it's social media. I mean, that's a basic, right? But ways to laterally communicate, and you have to enhance that and encourage it.
That's the challenge.
Well, on that note, I hate to bring this fascinating conversation to a close, but I do want to let everyone have their evening back. So we are going to transition to our dessert wine course, in which we each recommend something fun we've been enjoying this week. Martine, why don't we start with you? What would you like to recommend to our listeners this week?
I'm going to recommend the simplest thing I think I will recommend on the Fort Top. And this is for all y'all parents out there of kids probably, between 1 and, 8 years old. This past summer, this happened. It was awesome. We basically threw grape clusters from the store, seedless ones, into the freezer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then I don't know how big this is for other parents, but man, this was a huge awakening for me this past summer, where they turn into like little almost like sorbet pops in your mouth, and they melt, and then they eat slower because it gets so cold, so they don't get this massive sugar rush the way they just keep popping them in their mouth. So I highly recommend a huge. To me, this is novel. I'm sure to many parents, like, oh yeah, I knew that. But freeze your grapes, and even for yourself, it gets warm in the in Indian summer or whatever, that you can cool off with frozen.
I've seen this on TikTok with the twist of, like, before you freeze the grapes, shake them up with some powdered Jello, and they get that little Jello coating on the outside, and that's just crack for kids. Right
Oh
there.
man!
Or you can just use them as ice cubes in your cocktail, which is another option. Like it. Yeah. Thank you. Rob?
I don't know about you guys, but I try to figure out ways to, be better and things to do for myself, and how to find happiness, how to make others around me happy. Recognize that this is where we were, right? If you're in New York, you walk down the street, you don't even look at somebody. Matter of fact, you hide your eyes, you go the other way. But, I'm slowing down. I'm stopping and I'm talking to the butcher. I'm talking to the person that's ringing up food. People that I run into, I'm going to stop and try to talk to them for a couple of minutes.
Now you're the guy holding up the checkout line. All right.
I might
okay.
be, but you know what, damn it, I'm going to have fun and enjoy people for who they are, and remember, what life is about. And it's certainly enhanced with wine, and it's just you can't have enough glasses of wine to have 2-minute interchanges like that all day long. I mean, there's no way you could make it, but that's what I'm practicing right now, and it's a lot of fun.
Thanks, Rob. I was the guy up until this very minute that was behind you in the checkout going like, seriously, just shut up and move on. I gotta get something.
Exactly.
I will take this and I will adapt and slow down and live the moment and hear your conversation next time we're at the checkout stand together. Thank you.
I love it. It's like life on the piazza. Just take your time, stroll around, chat. I think we all need to remind ourselves that that's what it's all about.
Do we really want to go back to where we were?
No.
I kind of don't. There's a lot of things that we've experienced, and I'm kind of into the change.
Felix, how about you?
So I'm going to say, as a paid up member of the New York media, the number one big social event of the fall for all of us is season 3 of Succession. It's coming back, people, on HBO, and we are all going to be watching it, and it is the greatest thing on TV. And if you haven't seen seasons 1 and 2, I can highly recommend watching seasons 1 and 2. And season 2 of Succession is the greatest thing on TV ever until now. We can hope that season 3 is better, but we are all going to be talking about it. And you can there's even a little bit of wine in there with Connor Roy does his wonderful hyper decanting. Bless him. Puts wine in a blender.
I love watching wine scenes in movies and TV shows. Well, I was not sure what my dessert wine course was going to be tonight until we started randomly talking about Hampton water, which I didn't even mean to bring up. But then we were talking about the power of storytelling, and it just occurred to me that Gérard Bertrand, I'm terrible French accent there, but who actually makes Hampton water, is a wonderful story, a totally inspirational winemaker. And so I can't just blow Hampton water off as being this silly John Bon Jovi wine, because I know this amazing winemaker who is behind it. And Martine, you've probably met him. Mm-hmm. He's so inspirational. He was a professional rugby player for one of France's biggest teams, but this was back before professional rugby players made much income. So they had to kind of do their sport, and they were nationally famous, but then they also had to have their day job, and his day job was working for his family winery. And when he was 21 years old, his father was killed in a car accident. And so he had to run the family winery, work harvest, which anyone who's worked in the industry knows, you're pulling all-nighters, and then go play rugby, and just kicked ass playing rugby and also making wine. And then he sort of transitioned to being one of France's foremost spokespeople for sustainable wine growing, and I believe is the largest biodynamic vineyard owner in Europe.
I believe that's true.
So there you go.
So what's his brand? If we don't want Hampton's water, or if it's past the summer now, so we don't want pink anymore.
Gérard Bertrand, so Gerard Bertrand. So just Google that.
All right.
And,
very thoughtful winemaker, very gentle, and very passionate about land stewardship.
And puts out a lot of affordable wine, like the Cremant de Limoux Brut. I mean, this is a great traditional method sparkling wine, and it's $20, but that those grapes were grown biodynamically. Okay, I'm sounding like an ad for this man, but I guess I'm just saying it really is all about the storytelling, because once you know the story, you think this is really inspirational. I've really been moved by this brand. Anyway, we must move on, sadly. Thank you so much to our fabulous panelists. What a fun conversation. Listeners, you can find Felix Salmon online at felixsalmon.com.
Or Axios.com even. That's my day job.
Of course, Axios and the Slate Wine podcast as well. You can check out Rob McMillan's world-famous State of the Wine Industry report at the Silicon Valley Bank website.
It has charts. So many charts.
And it's also entertaining. It's like the one financial report that makes me chuckle every year. And you can find that at svb.com. That's for Silicon Valley Bank. And Martine, where can our listeners find you online?
Well, you can find me and my company at reyeswinegroup.com. And while I'm at it, since I brought up my winery, I normally don't bring it up separately, but peterpaulwines.com is the brand that I manage. And so, yeah, those are the two, reyeswinegroup.com and peterpaulwines.com.
Very nice. And you can find, actually, I should bring up my day job as well, which I never talk about. But if you go to vinagency.com, you can read all about the creative work we love to do for fine wineries. You can read about my books at catherinecole.com. But really, what I really want you to do is go to theforetop.org, because listeners, we want to hear from you. So please check out our social media handles, get in touch with us, tweet us, Instagram us. I don't know if that's a verb. Please subscribe to The Foretop on your favorite podcast app. Leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts so others can find the pod. That's it for now. Signing out from the high-fiber, protein-packed city of Portland, Oregon. As always, so good to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.
This has been the Foretop Podcast. Catherine Cole is our executive producer. Izzy Kramer is our senior producer. And I'm Keelan King, sound supervisor. We are also assisted by audio editor, Michelle Richards, our production assistant, Rachel Grossman, and our social media assistants, Lex Rule and Nick Toole. Please visit our website, theforetop.org, to learn more about us, listen to back episodes, reach out to us on social media, and purchase books written by our amazing panelists. And if you have not already subscribed to The Foretop on iTunes, NPR One, or Spotify, please do so and leave us a rating. Stay safe out there, and thanks for listening.
Oh, wait a minute. Are you still there? Oh, well, if you're still listening, then I need to tell you something. I need to tell you about the fabulous swag over at sparklingwineanytime.com. Sparkling Wine Anytime is, of course, your favorite new book about all things bubbly, but it is also a wonderful website designed by our team, Lex and Rachel, and we have gifts and goodies galore for you. We have sparkling wine-themed beach towels, teas, cocktail napkins, fancy wine flasks, adorable tote bags, and more. And guess what? Your purchase will help to support a favorite cause of ours, Ahivoy, that's AHIVOY, check it out, which provides education and career training to vineyard stewards in the Willamette Valley. So it's a win-win for everyone, and who doesn't love sparkling wine anytime? Please head to sparklingwineanytime.com. We would love to see you there. Thanks. We love you all. You're wonderful. Kiss, kiss.